So nice to see so many of you quite late into the evening. I hope this will be engaging. I know you must be tired. So to begin with, I'd love to know how many of you are actually in analytics, like you would describe yourself as being part of data science and analytics. All right, not that many. How many of you get to work with data science and analytics practitioners on a daily basis? Quite many more. So that's nice. I hope this will be useful. I'm Arūnas. I'm a director of data science and analytics at Vinted. As you can see here and here, I only own blue shirts. They go with my eyes. So to begin with, let me get just a few definitions out of the way. One, I'm going to say a company, a business, a bunch in the context of talking about data. So when I say that, I mean a business unit that can be partitioned by function and by product. So at Vinted, the functions we have are these four. Your experience may vary, but the idea is still applicable. Please also appreciate this Dutch Renaissance art reimagined by AI. The second definition is data science. So when I say data science, I mean the entire function of data science and analytics, which can include these three sub-functions: analytics engineering for data curation, decision science more for business analytics, and then machine learning, which is quite technical. Sometimes I will dive particularly into the decision science part of it, so you'll see from the context where it's the case. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So more than 10 years ago, we had this article by Harvard Business Review claiming data science is the sexiest job of the 21st century. The question is, does it still hold up now, more than 10 years later? I think clearly so. For one, the function itself is as big as it ever was. You have sub-functions within it. It's very institutionalized. Also, data scientists make as much as engineers do, and still companies can't get enough of them, and the demand is very high. So it's all great. But the issue is that even if you have the best data scientists working for you, it's still not quite enough. You have to integrate them very well into the business and not have them just in the basement somewhere. So let me walk you through some of the models of integrating data teams into the business, and I'll talk specifically about the models that I myself have been part of at Vinted or elsewhere, and I'll try to highlight the drawbacks and the benefits of each. And spoiler alert, there's no real perfect integration model. All of them have their own particular drawbacks, and you have to really think about your particular circumstance in the business and the problem you want to solve, and also think about the pros and cons of the integration models that you employ and that you ultimately probably going to have to mix together. So the first and the most obvious, I guess, way to integrate data teams is to just have a central data team somewhere in the business. It can be part of a particular unit like marketing, or it can be very general. And as a matter of fact, when I joined Vinted, I was part of a team just like this, working for serving the entirety of the organization. It was called Special Ops. We were as cool as it sounds, but it's not all perfect with a setup like this. So the pros are, of course, that it's very good for learning. You can have junior people in a team like this. Every person is going to be, every data scientist is going to be very close together. So it's very good for learning and also for more senior people to further improve their skills. It's also very flexible. So you can have these people in the team working on very different projects. You can have a pair of them working on the same project. You can have the entire team on the same thing. And also, it's very flexible. It can turn on a dime and change direction. So this comes in very useful during crises. And for instance, when we had COVID, and me and the team, we ran basically daily delivery cycles. We would have a stand-up in the morning and a stand-up in the evening and kind of deliver throughout the day as we sought to really understand what was happening to the business as the first lockdowns hit us. So that's nice. On the other hand, it's not exactly scalable. There's a very limited number of data people you can have in this team, and it's also quite distant from stakeholders and from other functions, meaning your delivery power will be limited, because as a data scientist, you can really only get as far as recommendations. And from my own experience, it can sometimes take years for someone to implement them, even if they are good recommendations. As a manager, you could solve this by forcefully making room in product teams' roadmaps, but it causes friction. It's not pretty, not great for anyone involved. And then finally, teams like this are typically at risk of getting a bunch of urgent, high-impact cases on their plate. And while it sounds cool in theory, it quickly leads to stress and can result in burnout. And then all of that is typically tricky to wrap into a coherent vision and mission for the team itself. So it's always a bit of a special team. And kind of a polar opposite of this setup is to have people embedded into product teams. So this is something we also have at Vinted, and you would just have a data person be one of the functions in what you basically call an agile team, reporting to the data science manager and also being part of the broader data science and analytics organization. The pros and the cons are kind of flipped from the previous case. So you're now close to your cross-functional peers. Implementation is a lot easier. You can get a lot more done. You're also in a good position to kick off big projects, be the analytical projects or something else. Again, you're kind of close to that team. You could get things done. Generally, I find that people in teams like this, when they are embedded, they more often work on something that's immediately useful. Again, because you kind of have to vet everything you do with the team, it's gonna end up being implemented. On the flip side, not very flexible, because again, you have to align with the rest of the team on what you're gonna do. Also, while you gain proximity to other functions, you lose proximity to data science peers. So it's a bit more difficult to learn. As a manager, especially, you have to forcefully ensure that best practices are being developed and shared, and that learning happens, and that silos are prevented from forming. Finally, you typically don't put very junior people into a product team, because it's a delivery role. It's not really about learning, and for junior people, it's not that easy. So you probably see that these two appear to complement each other, and that's what we have at Vinted, both of these setups working simultaneously. So this type of setup, for one, is very scalable. You can have a bunch of people in a setup like this. You can really raise your data to engineering ratio if that's what you're going for. You can have different units tackling different type of work. As a matter of fact, you can have very complex projects going on. So you can form teams like this, some people call them tiger teams or mission teams. You can have an intelligence team, a central team being the core. You can have someone from a product team participating as well with that particular knowledge. And you could even have someone else from analytics from a different domain entirely also be part of that project team. So this kind of gives you some flexibility, and you can play around with the setup and get all kinds of interesting work done. On the flip side, again, it's relatively expensive, which is not necessarily a big problem, but if you're just getting into analytics, if you're a smaller, newer company, it might be difficult to justify. And then also management gets tricky. So for one, you have these different units that you need to coordinate somehow. You need to share best practices. You can, as the organization scales, you can put managers, for this delivery unit here. You can have a manager for the intelligence team, and then you can have a manager for the whole thing. Maybe this becomes a particular subdomain, a function, not a function, but an area of some business importance in itself, and you can have a manager for that. You have a lot of options, but all of them can lead to some hierarchy. And that's not always great. Some of these people might end up being very far away from the top manager in the structure. So that's about integration. And in summary, I'd say central teams especially are a powerful tool, but they are also a bit tricky. So you need to ensure that they have a very clear mandate and that they can be focused on a particular scope. And the teams and their leaders should have agency. A particular problem is if you only have central teams to kind of hold on to data scientists until you need someone in a product team, or someone in a product team lacks analytical capacity, and you kind of pluck these people away from the central team, put them where you need them. That's not ideal for the leader nor for the entire central team. So you would avoid lending these resources to anyone else as much as possible. But again, generally, no integration model is really perfect. So you just look at the pros and cons and do what you can. Let's go into the second part of the analysis presentation. And that's balancing deep research with quick work. So what should data scientists as a big function do generally? You know, no one really knows, I think. This Venn diagram, I believe, is also about 10 years old. So in the beginning, you would say, you know, a data scientist is like equal parts hacker, statistician, or mathematician, and a subject matter expertise. Then we said it's also some kind of consulting going on there, also good storytelling skills, and it quickly begins to read more like a dating profile than a job description. And that's weird. So let's look empirically. If you have a good data scientist, how are they gonna spend their time at work? And I think it's usually about 30% stakeholder management, and that's really the key to everything, because data science is a support function that partners with others to deliver value. So you're gonna have to sit down with your stakeholders, figure out what the problem is, figure out whether the solution that you are going to propose would work, and really also just invest in these relationships to keep your finger on the pulse of the business at all times. Then you have maintenance and internal work for about 10 to 20% of your time, and that can range from unavoidable to actually pleasurable, because you can have dealing with data issues, dealing with maintenance of dashboards or data models, but you can also have participation in hiring and learning and stuff like that, which is actually fun to do. And then hopefully, most of your time is going to go into hands-on analysis. But even there, only part of that work will result in tangible business recommendations, and some of that work will end up with dead ends or rejected hypotheses. So the question of how to balance deep research with quick insights becomes even more important, because not all of the time you spend on analysis will be useful. And my answer is simple, even if not exactly easy to implement. I would say you want your data scientists to work on both types of projects at the same time. So especially for senior people, you're going to have them working on one high-profile project or two, which will range from about a couple of weeks to maybe over a year. And you would want these projects to have both business and functional implications, as in kind of everyone learns something from that project, and it's also very useful to the business. On top of that, you're going to have them work on 3 to 4 quick ad hoc queries in parallel. And at first glance, that sounds awful. Why would you want to work that way? But the reality of the matter is that especially if the big projects are going to slow down, they're going to stop entirely at some points in time, and you want your data people to have something to fall back to and to keep that pace of delivery constant. So this is what we want to achieve, and typically it works better than it sounds. But let's actually look at what do these different types of projects give us. And with deep research, so this is what's going to really move the needle on your key business metrics. And I think an often overlooked benefit is that if you go into analysis, some big analysis in a new area is going to educate the people in the business, and kind of the impact will be multiplied through everyone who learns something from that analysis. It could also be just a complex data product like a fancy machine learning model or something like that. And also through these projects is where most learning will happen, which is again why you want every data scientist involved in this. On the flip side, the quick analysis, again, could be just a couple of hours, could be a couple of weeks. This is going to guide your business decisions on a daily basis. And this is where you will discover opportunities either for the deep research or for something you actually want to implement directly into the business. It's also a source of instant gratification for data people, so that's nice. And it's also how you build reputation for being useful. So especially as a data scientist, before you get into some deep research for a year, you want to do a bunch of quick stuff so that people know that you know what you're doing, right? So again, in conclusion, you want both types of work happening. The same persons should be engaged in both at the same time. And you want to deliberately plan these high impact projects. Otherwise, you can be 100% busy with the quick stuff and not get any high impact projects off the ground even. I personally typically rely on the rocks and pebbles and sand analogy. If you don't know it, Google and you'll have a bunch of stuff. So you want to make sure on a quarterly basis probably that you have something like this in there. And the advice I find applies to virtually everyone, but of course, having in mind the central versus embedded split we talked about before, you would expect central data teams to be a bit more engaged in this long-term stuff, and embedded people will focus more on the quick analysis and will be typically better at that. Which brings us to the third part of the talk about making data-driven business decisions. So what actually is the job of data scientists? It's not exactly to just provide data, although we do have several sub-functions for that. Specifically, we have data engineering, we have analytics engineering, but it's not just that. It's also not just to provide insights, because that even sounds like something you do at a university, and most businesses are not research organizations. So what you actually want to do as a data scientist, you want to partner with other functions, with stakeholders at the business, with subject matter experts typically, to deliver value through partnerships and through guiding decisions and through helping the business make better decisions. And that is more of a people problem than it's a technological problem. And therefore, it's not very easy to solve. And what I'm going to do is tell you about 3 rules or lessons that I think help you get on your way to being data-driven in a useful way. So one is that being data-driven is a long-term game. There will not be any instant success with data. You're going to have to learn to integrate data into the business, and you will want your teams to build a very measurable, very objective picture of the space in which they want to have impact. And to do that, you want your data scientists can initiate and probably even drive this process, but you want the rest of the processes and even the culture at the business to be conducive to that. So some of the questions you would want to ask yourself is if your product teams are actually expected to take responsibility and to show what kind of impact they had and to own their area. Second, are they expected to track KPIs and metrics in that area to quantify the impact they had? And third, are they expected to be very explicit about how they make decisions? Or do you just kind of rely on your teams to make, firing from the hip type of decisions? And if it's no to those 3, then there's very little space for data people to actually contribute to the success of the business. The second rule is that you need to know the capabilities and the limits of data science. I think it's one of the most prominent risks to any good data scientist is to have a product manager who's very well-intentioned, but very ill-informed about what data science can and cannot do. And stuff you get is data scientists looking into measure impact of features that were launched without proper experimentation, proper A/B testing, or even just going out to gather insights, which is typically a quite useless mandate. So what you want to do here as a manager in data science or a senior staff member of data science analytics is to educate the non-analytical functions in the business about what data science can and cannot do and what the best practices are. And as the data science organization matures, you want to have more and more accessible, written down content about how all of this works. And the third rule is don't over rely on data. As economists here in the room will tell you, business is inherently risky. That's not going away. Data will not eliminate that risk, and data will also not be a substitute for good judgment, for subject matter expertise, and for logic. So you shouldn't expect data to pick up the slack of other functions, especially product management. Typically, these two functions primarily should be working together to deliver business value. The second part here about not over-relying on data, again, especially if you begin with the data-driven mandate in your company, something that happens frequently is teams get tunnel vision. They begin to only deliver or discover stuff that can be measured because you can ask them to be very data-driven about what they do. And that can be good or it can be bad because they might be overlooking opportunities that are not exactly measurable. What happens very frequently is that you basically need to be able to launch some features without experimentation. Sometimes you will be measuring impact through very basic adoption metrics and not fancy estimations of lifetime value. And sometimes you will set ambition levels from intuition and not through advanced forecasting. Which brings me to the very end of my talk. And just to summarize, data will bring incremental value and kind of improve your decision-making over time, but it will be nothing like what's shown, for instance, in the film The Big Short, where you have like late-night eureka moments and some data guy saving the business almost accidentally. That's just not going to happen. It will be hard work. Integrating data will probably be difficult and present some challenges. And managing data people will require quite a particular approach. And again, data will not be a substitute for subject matter expertise. So if you do have data, you still need all the other functions to be very good. And you generally need to be very good at your business. And that's it. Thank you very much for being here.